And Dad's point of view was that if we would just put things into it, you can leave because you don't like what you see, or you can stay and try to improve the church. The church is not the gospel. Despite what some people like to say, he absolutely drew a line. To him, there was a fine, there's some overlap, but just there was generally a fine line between priesthood, gospel, church. He would say, look, the church is imperfect. It's full of imperfect men, and I know because I'm one of them. Mm-hmm. That's one of my favorite quotes.
It is time for another episode of the Cultural Hall, and I'm excited. I am intrigued to see where this episode goes. We are going to talk all about Marion D. Hanks within this episode. You probably think, that name sounds familiar. Apostle, is that who that was? Someone different, a disruptor, a change maker. Well, we're going to get all into it, and joining us to talk all about Marion D. Hanks is Richard D. Hanks, his son and author of a new book called To Be a Friend of Christ, The Life of Marion D. Hanks. Welcome, Richard.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Now, are you a Richard? Are you a Rich? Were you ever a Richie? Let's start there.
Oh, it's a long story. The short version of it is I was Richard till I was about 26 and sitting in my first cubicle at Frito-Lay, getting all kinds of phone calls, and I just got tired of saying, hello, this is Richard. So I just moved over to Rich, and I'm Rich.
See, I was a Rick all growing up, and Ricky when I was real young, and then Rick, and then when I went to college, I was like, you know what, I want to be a Richie. So I became a Richie, and I'm formally a Richard. Frito-Lay, tell me about what your life profession is. That sounds
glad to be in the Richard Club.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to talk about me, but I'm a business person, and I spent like 35, 40 years doing that. And
geez,
I've jumped around to all kinds of, I've honestly been everything from a CPA to the head of sales, which is highly unusual. And most of my career was in strategy and finance, and I worked for big companies and little companies.
And are you retired? It sounds you're using language like, well, I used to do that. Now you are a retired person.
I am. I prefer to be called a gentleman investor, but really I spend too much time in my wood shop for that. But I guess I'm retired.
Doing
I was
what
actually,
kind of stuff?
What is the word they use sometimes? There's a funny word they use now. I wasn't volunteered. I was voluntold.
Uh-huh.
I was invited to retire and by President Uchtdorf at the time and go to Alabama with my wife where she could run a mission. And I could be along for the ride.
Now, wait a minute. I know you don't want to talk about you and you want to talk about cops, but I've got to know what that's like. You ran a mission. When was this? Alabama?
They call them mission leaders now. I was a mission president. We were in Alabama in, let's see, 13 to 16.
Okay. And
we've been home 8 years.
Okay. That's the South.
We went out, I had 3 children, and now I have 673 children. But they're not children. They're all 30 now, so.
Does it feel like that, really, children?
It really does. I love them that much. It probably annoys our real biological 3 children, but we really love these young people. It was the time of our lives, and we stay in touch. I had one here yesterday, and another 2 I'm going to lunch with next week. So I just really try not to impose, but it's just been fun.
It's an interesting relationship, I think, with mission presidents and with those who serve under mission presidents. I served a little bit earlier than that, and so I recently had the opportunity to attend the funeral of our mission mom, is what we called her, but our female mission president, and people came from everywhere. There were so many people who flew in last minute just to be able to be there, and almost like Sons of Mosiah kind of thing. It was like we were so grateful to see each other after all that time, and even greater was our joy that we were still, in the gospel and all this. It was an incredible feeling that I don't know that there's another relationship quite like it, both in the church or just even in the world.
I don't know of one. Well, there's all the old friends in foxholes, but missions are a specific kind of that with spirituality and love and thrown in. So yeah, I feel the same way about my mission. In fact, my reunion's still going on. Golly, I'm 64, so whatever. I mean, I've been home a long time, and we still keep meeting.
And you served your mission in Scotland,
Scotland, yeah.
and now
No
getting a
kilt. I
temple.
didn't wear a kilt. What?
And now they're getting a temple in Scotland. Did you
They
cry
are, you bet. Of
uncontrollably?
course, I'm my as they say today, my Facebook's blowing up with Scottish people. So excited.
It's a unique experience. I found myself so I served in Cleveland, and when they announced the Cleveland Temple, I don't know what happened, allergies or just something going crazy at that moment too. They just said Cleveland, and I could not. I just uncontrollably started weeping for the people whom I had the opportunity to serve.
That's how I feel about Scotland.
Mm. Mm. I just want to ask you one more question. It seems to me like being in charge of, as you said, 671, early, late teen, early 20 something people, that takes my anxiety and just throws it through the roof. Do you learn like the love of the Savior in a different way? Because to me, I feel like I look back at the mission and I think, yeah, I think about half of us were doing what we were supposed to, and I'm pretty sure the other half I don't want to know, or the mission president certainly wanted to know. How did you deal with kind of leading that age of people and or being in that position where you're essentially responsible for the lives of all those people?
But you do as best as you can, and you get no sleep for 3 years. I mean, you know, the law of large numbers was is just applies to everything. 30,000 wards or whatever we have now. There's always going to be a few of everything. With 670, we didn't have them all at one time, but we did get
Sure.
up to 300 and something. And yeah, there's always somebody who's not well, and there's somebody who's going through mental difficulty, and there's some who are just having troubles at home. And I mean, you basically spend 3 years just trying your best to love.
Mm.
And that's and the good news is I married somebody. I married way up on that, well, in all categories, but particularly in that one. And she and I just tried to love him, but there's the occasional, fist through the wall. and we had lots of sisters on my mission. We had 10 or 12 the whole 3 years or the whole 2 years I was there. And then the whole 3 years in Alabama, we had 150 at a time. So almost half the mission usually. But it was the best thing. You just grow to love these people. They come from all walks of life. They're out there talking about the Savior. How can it not be good? In general, in specific, there's a lot of sleepless nights trying to figure out where elder so and so is, and so forth. But most of the time, it's a wonder. I mean, 90% of it, 99% of the time, it's a terrific experience to be near such faithful kids.
Now, you made the joke about the mission president that you served as your wife was sort of taking the lead. I don't know the two of you at all. We met this morning as we started chatting a little bit and find out that we are closer, not necessarily related, but closer related than we could have ever imagined. Um, do you feel like she sort of let out and you were there kind of as a support, or do you
No,
feel like you were equally yoked, or do you feel
we
like
tried to be equal. Yeah, we tried to be equally yoked. I didn't like for all the work she did. I didn't like me being the mission president, and she was called something else. My mission president's companion, I think it
Mhm.
was. And so, we just among ourselves, we just decided that I'm going to call her mission president. I think we were equally yoked. I mean, in those days, it was right after the surge with the sisters coming out.
Mhm.
President Monson announced a change in age, and just I don't know if people know, but this massive surge of young women, and then with that, and younger young men. So with that together, both the young men and the young women, the mental health issues were skyrocketing, just to be honest. And
Mm.
um, and she did that part of the mission. She was in charge of most of the mental health issues, and so that's why I always give her equal credit. I ran the mission and did as best as I could, but it was really fun. I mean, people don't think about it. I gave something like 400 state conference talks and
Jeez.
baptisms every Saturday, and it's a real interesting thing. It's the hardest job we ever loved, is what we always say, and all of it's positive. I'm not excited about starting it again, but I would do it again if I went back to those years. I mean, I'm a little older now. I'm always amazed at this. The mission presidents called in their 60s and late 60s. I'm just like, whoa.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
In a way, I feel like it's almost how you look at older parents. When people are having kids in their 20s and early 30s, you're like, yeah, they've got enough energy. And then you see the people who figure that that's good for their life in their 40s or early 50s, and you just go, how, what? That,
then you meet a guy that I worked with years ago. He's 78 and has now taken over the parental care of his granddaughter. And I'm
oh,
just
wow.
like, oh, wow, that would be
Yes.
hard. But you know what? Totally worth it. And now we have these terrific relationships, and we're watching these wonderful young people grow and have families and their careers. It's really fun, honestly. It
Well,
really is a terrific thing to watch.
and the interesting sort of like stewardship and ability that you have to be able to speak to those who served underneath you. How many times have I heard in conversation, the one thing that my mission president used to tell me that has stuck with me my entire life? Like there's this almost sort of instant mentorship that also becomes this mantle that you, so long as you are alive, are able to have with these people that no one else has that relationship with, right? Like you can kind of come in and speak to, be a mentor to, be accessible to these folks in a way that a bishop or something else maybe could be, but isn't because of the reverence we have for mission presidents.
I agree with that. I feel that way about my mission president. He's passed on. He was, I would arguably, the second most important person in my life. And what you just described with my missionaries, I consider a gift.
Mm,
I'm sure
sure,
there are some of them that are, maybe didn't really groove on me,
sure.
or something. I mean, I don't keep track of who loves me and who hates me, but I would hope that I know they all love Liz. So the question is, how much of me can they put up with? But actually, I think we're pretty good friends, most of
Yeah,
them.
they come around to hang out with her, and they're like, "I guess Rich can be here too."
Yeah,
That's fine.
thank
That's
you.
fine. That's fine. You said second most important person in your life. I'm going to take a stab and say because well, obviously the obligatory answer would be your wife is most important person, but up there somewhere is your pops.
Yeah, yeah.
Well,
Well,
oh, go ahead.
she's my best friend. I'm talking about mentors, and yeah, he's it, of course. I mean, he's the reason I wrote this book. He's the reason, that I am who I am. So
So
good
I
with
want
him.
to I want to take a break real quick, and when we come back, I want to set the stage in case people are only getting name familiar with Marion D. Hanks. I want to let people know exactly who he is, and then I want to talk about what it's like to take such a person and then the responsibility of writing the book, the memoir, the here world. This is the lasting impression that you will have of this most important person to me, and putting
Sure.
that in the world. I want to take a break. We'll come back and talk about all those things in the second block of the Cultural Hall.
Imagine running a small business today. It's challenging. Imaging and internet presence is an absolute must. Even with that, you're still a small star in a bright cyber universe. Now, imagine you have someone who understands how to get your site designed for your talents and then easily searched by potential clients. Imagine Lennon Design. Whether it's strictly a website or a whole package of logo creation, advertising media, and promotional materials, Lennon Design is your partner in business. They'll test the boundaries of their imagination to create something unique for you. When you need creative, affordable design, let it be Lennon Design. Call 801-699-3022 or visit lennondesign.com.
Here in the second block of the Cultural Hall, remember you can always send us an email, contact@theculturalhall.com. You like this episode and episodes like this, would love it if you send us an email. We love to hear that feedback. If you have other guest suggestions, go ahead and send them along. Again, that email address is contact@theculturalhall.com. So Rich, I'm assuming that, based as I look at kind of your life trajectory and you work for a lot of years in big business doing a lot of things, and then you serve as a mission president, and then you come home and you're one of these guys that's like, I need a thing, I need a project, and then one of the fruits that we all get to enjoy is your need to have those projects, to have those things. You've written the book To Be a Friend of Christ, The Life of Marion D. Hanks. How did this come about? Was this a deathbed request from your pops? Is this a
No,
life mission from you that you said he needs to be known? Tell me, what was the impetus for all this?
sure. Thank you for asking. No, he would never ask for this. In fact, he declined putting his name on buildings, and there are a few, but they usually sneak by. I just, I wanted the world. First of all, I wanted my grandchildren. Really, the impetus was my grandchildren need to know who their grandfather was, and my great grandchildren, our great grandchildren. I really wrote it for my dad. I didn't write it for me. I didn't write it to make money. It's certainly not going to happen. I didn't write it for fame and fortune. I didn't write it for any of that. I wrote it for my dad and my grandkids. And the third reason would be, um, and this is a little bit presumptuous, I think there is an entire church that needs to know that a person like this existed. Well, I think there is an entire section of members of the church that needs to know this. He was highly unusual. He was not, if I may, just to explain a little, I could go anywhere with this, but he was a true Renaissance man. He was a true community builder. He was never an elders quorum president. He was never a bishop. He was never a stake president. He was 31 and got a call from David O. McKay to come down to his office. And my parents' lives all changed in one day. And there was no such thing as emeritus. He helped create that 40 years later. But at that time, they went from being 31 and 27 years old with two little girls to we're in this till we die. So, and that, by the way, that's a lot of the general authorities have similar type stories. None of them were called at 31, and so he had this life, and his life was one of service, and he pushed the institutional church that way in every possible way. And if I started to list all of the things that he spearheaded, catalyzed, or just got going and fought for, and I use the word fought for because there were a lot of people that didn't want to do what he believed.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't take his authority from a man or a person or a set of 12 persons. He took his authority from the scriptures. And sometimes the scriptures and the things we believe in as a church are two different things, to be quite honest. And so, he stayed trying to get the church to do what he believed the Savior would have us do. And I would say the second thing he believed in was D&C 28, that there is one man on the earth at a time who receives revelation for the church. So he balanced, he was, but people flocked to him. People with what we today now call faith crises were just flocked to him. People who were upset with the black ban flocked to him. People who couldn't understand why we didn't have our missionaries doing Christian service all day, flocked to him. And I could just go on. And he was that person, that people on the fringes, people who are downcast, people who felt marginalized. He was the general authority for years and years. Not the only one, obviously, but he was sort of the main one. And so I wanted people to know that. And I hope it'll be helpful for those who who might wonder, how are we where we are in the church and in the culture of the church?
It is, I think, even now, as connected, air quotes for those that can't hear or can't see what I just did, but we're in a day and in an age that we're so connected, that I feel like we're able to find people that are feeling the same way that we might, in regards to either our testimony, our faith, where we're at, our journey, all of those things. But I also think that those that are having struggles, those that have questions, those who sometimes hear the words of the prophet or the apostles and have some sort of struggle with it, I think just as much now as we are connected now, just as much as they did 50 years ago, I think that within our faith tradition, whether that is just the traditions or whether it's within our faith, we have a hard time being able to be in that place of questioning and being able to feel at home. I guess what I'm trying to say is it seems like to me that when I go and worship, I find most people kind of put like a true believing foot forward, and if I find people that are sort of leaving the church are those people that have a question that has never been answered. We're never able to become settled about a particular issue, and you feel like your pops was able to speak to those people, be able to help those people in a way that maybe we think of only a few here in the 21st century that would be able to address to those people. Yeah, am I understanding?
Yeah, I look, it's not a competition. We're all just
No, no.
trying to find a way home, right? So I don't want to give the impression that he was the only one, but he was an unusual a person in that way. Let me address some of the things you just said.
Yeah.
One of the chapters in the book is called, I think it's a chapter or a section. I called it "Stay Inside and Lift,"
Hmm.
and he would say that all the time. Look, you can choose to go outside and attack, or you can stay inside and lift. And there are things inside the church that are difficult for people. He chose. I chose the opening line of the book in the preface to be Marion Duff Hanks was a believer, and he was, and he believed there was a prophet on the earth. But or and he also believed that we didn't have all the answers. And he loved to say, I don't know. And he would help others sometimes learn how to say, I don't know, as opposed to, trying to guess, I guess. He spent his time as a general authority, 40 years, trying to lift and build others, as opposed to nitpicking. So, for example, I'll give you an example. No one's
please.
asked in any of these podcasts yet. I use an analogy of a painting with a frame. He spent, and if that's the Book of Mormon, for example, he spent his time on the painting. What does Alma 11 say? And what does it mean? As opposed to the frame. How did it get here? How was it translated? How many chiasmus are there in it?
Sure.
He just didn't take his faith from what he would call, people get caught up in the thick of thin things. That's a famous quote he loved to quote. And the other thing you would say is the things that matter most should not be at the mercy of the things that matter least.
Mm.
And the things that mattered most to him, here's a great example, another great example, in my opinion. You got Matthew 25, you got Matthew 28, they're right next to each other.
Mm-hmm.
Matthew 28, I bet every member of the church can quote. It's go ye into all the world and teaching and baptizing. Matthew 25 is the goats and the sheep. And says, look, if we don't go to hospitals and prisons and poor people, we're not getting into heaven. For paraphrase.
Yeah.
Neither of those.
Say that might be a new revised version reading, but I understood the principle.
People can go read it. It's probably his favorite set of, or at least he quoted it the most. To him, those were equal in importance. So, for example, he pushed hard every year for years to get the missionaries to do service, and he. I think I put this in the book. He said, why don't we replace aggressive proselyting with aggressive Christianity? So then we moved to 6 hours a week, and now we're at 10 hours a week. If he had his way, it would have been 100 hours a week or 80, however many hours there are in a.
So a quick question for clarification around that. Was there before that sort of pushing, that urging, that lifting, I like that term for that. Was that something that missionaries just were not to do, or?
Oh, no, they were actually told not to. Don't go back to people you've baptized. They're baptized. They're the members now. No reactivation programs, and you don't have time. I have hundreds of letters. I put one in the book, I think, of a missionary saying, didn't I come here to follow Christ? And my companions, this is not to my dad, this is someone sent it to my dad. My companions won't stop and help a guy pushing a car up a hill because we need to get another 5 proselyting hours.
Jeez.
And I would bet many missionaries can resonate with that. That is not what he believed. He believed that I hesitate to use my own examples, but sometimes I can't help myself. If we ask 100 people on the street in Manhattan today, what does Mormon mean? and I let you sit and think about it, and we wrote it on a blackboard, we'd all come up with the same answers: white shirts, the Book of Mormon musical, polygamy, no drinky, no sexy, no. I mean, there's just like 20 things, right?
Yeah,
Or 10 things.
sure.
Wouldn't it be great if in 30 years we ask 100 people in the street in Manhattan, what's a Mormon? And they say, well, those are the young kids that raked my yard,
Hmm.
emptied my U-Haul, helped me when I couldn't walk up the stairs. And then here's the kicker: which one of those two would have the most baptisms?
Hmm.
See, my opinion, and I'm honestly, I'm mimicking his with an example that's more modern. The Savior was pretty clear. Even when he said, "Go ye into all the world," he said, "Go ye into all the world, teaching them to observe whatsoever I have commanded you." And so, what did he commanded us? Well, one of the things he commanded us was 3 chapters earlier.
Hmm.
The least of these, my brethren. It's not that we shouldn't do missionary work. It's just that he thought, here's this massive force for good, and if we unleash this massive force for good in doing aggressive Christianity, think about, and it wasn't baptisms he was after; it was just following Jesus. I got kind of off the subject there, didn't I?
No, I think you're great. I have a few questions I want to ask around this. Where do you think that your pops got it from? Is it from his dad? Is it a calling that he felt personally or that he had received? But what was it that made him be not only a lover of the least of these, but to have this innate desire to, well, as the very title of your book calls it, be a friend of Christ, be an example of Christ, have people see Christ in him and what he's doing? Where did he get that from?
I don't know the order I would put these in, but I would say his mother, Maud. His dad died when he was 2, and his mother was a single woman who, by the way, became Ward Relief Society president, then Stake Relief Society president, and a delegate in the politics. She raised these 6 kids, no husband, never got remarried, and they were poor as church mice. And they lived, in Capitol Hill. And when she's Relief Society president, and my dad would say, hey, his mom would say, go down to the store and get a loaf of bread. Here's $1. And he'd say, well, there's 7 loaves of bread on the table right there. Can we just have some of that? And she'd say, no, those are for the poor people. And
Mm.
he wrote in his journal, I didn't know that I was poor, but I kind of figured it out. So I don't know if it was just his mother, and then you add into it his knowledge. I mean, he had the deepest knowledge of the scriptures of anyone I ever met. And when I say that, people kind of shake their heads. Yeah, well, weren't there a few other No, there weren't.
Mm.
When he became a seminary teacher, this is hard for people to believe, but you can go on the church website. There was no one teaching the Book of Mormon.
Wow,
We
that is
didn't have a
yeah.
seminary program for the Book of Mormon in the 19, whatever it would have been, 40s, because and there's some reasons for that in politics and so forth. But we've been teaching Old and New Testament, I suppose, as a church. And so he was the first real seminary teacher in the church that had an organized, I should say, organized approach to teaching the Book of Mormon. And he would make all of his own materials. There weren't any. There was no manual. There's no. So I don't know. I would say Maud, his mother, growing up without money, and then he just loved the scriptures and the Savior. I suppose that just turned him. I was thinking about this morning in preparation for this. When I have 4 sisters, when we all sat down and said, "What are we going to put on his tombstone?"
Mhm.
And we went through all the options. This is one of those tactical problems. And it's interesting. So what we didn't put the temple, although that would have been apropos. We put the scriptures. There's a little icon of the scriptures. And then we put the phrase that he had received in it, one of his many, what do they call them? Honorary doctorates,
Mhm.
and from UVU in Gene, England. And it says, uh, serve others. I wrote it down because it's been a while. Well, wherever, serve others wherever they are, whatever their faith.
Mm.
And how he got there, I think, on his knees, and again, his mother and his growing up and the scriptures would be my guess. But that's his whole life was like that.
One of the things that I appreciate is it seems the boldness, and let me wrap a little bit around that. The idea of lift and stay is exhausting. sometimes for those within who, whether it's just something that sort of maybe bothers them a little, or something that they just feel like, hey, I genuinely feel that this policy, this whatever, the way that we are doing this, I genuinely feel like this is wrong. And for so many who have made the choice to stay and to lift, sometimes it just becomes so exhausting to lead a life that way, and to be able to speak, boldly in not in opposition that makes it sound like you're, rabble rousing or something like that. But how did you ever see in your dad, and you call him Duff, which I think we haven't addressed yet, the D and Marion D. Hinks's Duff, and that's what everyone called him. How did you or did you ever see with Duff where he not gave up, obviously, faithful to the end, but would just become so, um, I don't know, racked with the pain of other people, or just exhausted with, being someone who stood for right. Did you ever see that side of him, or that part of him?
Yeah, I wouldn't tell me the truth if I didn't say, yeah, I never saw him give up ever.
Sure.
He wasn't, and he was no shrinking violet, and he believes strongly. Oh, let me back up a little bit.
Please.
So he comes home well, first of all, he's minding his own business. He's been a general authority for what, 51? I got to think about this. He's been a general authority for roughly 9 or 10 years. He gets called down to the first presidency's office, and President, I'm going to make this really short, so don't attack me if I don't get it perfect. He says, President McKay looks at him and says, I need you to go to England and clean up the baseball baptisms problem. My dad didn't, okay. He goes there. It's a mess. It's got its own, you can go look that up somewhere else. It's got its own life
Yeah.
of, Mike Quinn wrote some stuff, and there was a section in the book, but it was a mess. And from that, by the way, came out these missionaries who adored him.
Hmm.
Stake Presidents, Relief Society, all of them, not, just because of what happened, including two of our current day apostles were his missionaries. He comes home, he's exhausted. The baptisms have plummeted over in England purposefully, and the retention has gone significantly up, and families are being baptized again instead of this issue.
Mm-hmm.
And he's exhausted, and President McKay calls him down to his office, and he gives him a blessing. It's not recorded anywhere other than he told me and my family members, my sisters. And in that blessing, President McKay said, let your voice be heard.
Mm.
Even in opposition. By the way, it's almost the identical concept. It's not the identical words, the identical concept of his patriarchal blessing. So he did. He let his voice be heard. And most of the time, that was a voice of mercy, Jesus, Savior, service. Some of the time, that voice was in opposition to things he thought were incorrect. I never saw him give up, but I saw him get frustrated. And I've read, I don't think there's anyone alive who's read as many letters to and from him, and all his journals. And I mean, I've read everything I can find in the world. And he would get frustrated occasionally with things he just didn't understand. There were general authorities, and they don't always agree. Sometimes this perception is that they all sit down and agree. I think they can pray and come out of a room and agree at the end because they're going to support.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't mean they agree going in. And there were general authorities that hated Boy Scouts.
Sure.
There was a general authority with 7 or 8 sons who hated Boy Scouts. My dad was slated to become the president of the Boy Scouts when he was sent to Hong Kong. It's another story.
Mm-hmm.
There were general authorities who did not like YSA wards, or at that time we had student singles wards. There were general authorities that thought church discipline should include punishment. Very strong in the 1950s and 60s that if you're a bishop, you do something wrong, you're out for years, decades, just I guess.
Mm-hmm.
These are all things he just disagreed with as it relates to what the scriptures say. So let's just take that last one as just an interesting one.
Sure. What you don't hold on. What you don't know about me is that for the good part of my 20s, I was excommunicated from the church. and have come back. And
Welcome
so,
back.
yeah, well, thank you very much.
Open arms.
Yes, thank you. But we don't have time for the story with that. But most people, when I tell, kind of even just a general idea of what I was excommunicated for, they go, that should not have been that way. And as a church, we need to do better. But for nearly a decade, it impacted my life. Go on with what you were going to say, sir.
Well, I kind of got off your original question. I hope that's okay because
You're fine. That's what we do.
If I don't make it back with the breadcrumbs, it's because I'm old. Um, so we grew up in a family where mercy was discussed.
Hmm.
And he would, I think this is in the book. I got to be careful here. He'd be in a meeting in the 50s. So he's been a brand new general authority. He's 33 years old, I guess. He's been in the war. He's been on a mission. He's newly married, and he's never been a church leader. And now he's like, in those days, there were only like 30 general authorities.
Yeah.
And then they were all treated the same, by the way. There's this later thing where the 12 apostles have risen up in people's zeitgeist and minds. And
sure.
Back then, they were all just getting on airplanes every Friday night, flying somewhere in the world. I mean, it was all hands on deck.
Mm-hmm.
So he'd go to a meeting and he'd have to listen to his colleagues in the first presidency of the 70 or in the 12. And sometimes they would talk about abstract principles, and sometimes they would talk about individuals. And he wrote in his journal, I don't understand this. And he'd say this. You got the lost coin, the lost sheep, the prodigal son. Jesus is drawing in the sand with a woman who's been caught in adultery. And he didn't tell her, don't go to church for a couple of months. Don't take the sacrament for 3 years. And if you're lucky, we'll let you back in.
Yeah.
He said, go sin no more, and I'm not going to cast any of the first stones at you. It's easy to say all this now because there's going to be people watching this podcast who'll go, yeah, of course, that's how we should be. But I mean, it's not like they were Puritans and Calvinists, but the concepts were completely different. And so, yeah, he'd come home and he'd write something frustrating about that.
Mm-hmm.
He'd say, I don't understand XYZ general authority. It's almost like he wants to punish people, as opposed to his whole life was quick repentance, bring him back in, love him, and put your arms around him, and that's what we saw in our family every year of my life. I mean, that's just the way he behaved. He wasn't all that excited when I didn't mow the lawn, but that's a whole different thing.
Yeah, certainly. Though
I get the same mental beating as you probably would if you didn't take the garbage out. But other than that, I got to inject some humor. It was getting too serious.
No, one of the things that I, as we sort of have been, taking the trip down memory lane through the church, and we go 50s and 60s and 70s and church leadership and stuff like that. This is sort of aside with your book, but your pops is a great example of this. I feel like in a more public discourse within the church that there was disagreement or that allowed, I think, members of the church to see that there was consensus, sure, but that there were different perspectives that were being shared from the pulpit. I think it was B.H. Richards and Ezra Taft Benson who won General Conference sort of like vaguely went after each other, and then they both get called in and are like, the pulpit and General Conference is not a time to be going after each other. I may have one of the people incorrect. I know President Benson was one of them, but before he was the prophet. And so to be able to see these very obvious different personality types, belief systems, not belief systems in like religious ways, but like even just like a more liberal leaning or a more conservative, if we want to get political for a second. And it seems like now we just have this general consensus of the 12 or the 12, and their messages almost come out the same. Does that resonate with you, or do you think I'm way off?
No, I think you're exactly historically correct. And today. It's an unfortunate thing. It's
yes.
Look, I got up today and I combed my hair and I put on a nice shirt. I mean, I do want to portray an image. We all put our best foot forward,
Hmm.
right? I don't lean into a left hook, but at some point in time, that the lack of transparency, of difficulty, of things that have not been revealed, that will cause a problem, and it surely has in our church. I
Yeah.
don't think I'm telling anyone anything they don't already know, but I don't think most of it is ever. In fact, I'm sure, as much as I've been exposed to it, I don't think people ever have bad intent. These are men who have and women who have given up their lives. I mean, I love Jeff Holland. He's been a close member of our family. You think he ever wakes up and says, "I'm in this till I'm dead"?
Yeah.
Right? So for anyone to ever ascribe bad intent to any of the 12 or there's no, I really dislike the ex-Mormons and anti-Mormons or whatever you want to call them. I dislike that greatly. I know these are terrific men.
Hmm.
Having said that, there's a feeling that we need to always put the best foot forward, and I just personally don't think that's helpful. I think that's not. I think you ought to know that people believe different things. I'll just give one example because it's in the book, so I
Yeah.
won't offend anybody anymore. I was on my mission and got. I honestly don't know how I got it. There was no internet back then, right after the Civil War.
Yeah. Back
So
when
I
you.
got a copy of this talk by Bruce McConkie called Seven Deadly Heresies, where he got up and just blasted basically all of us for believing any one of these seven things. So I think in the book I wrote home because I don't want to get in trouble, but we had these magic phones in Scotland in the Highlands, and if you put 10 pence in, you could talk forever. So I think I might have called home, but I don't know. Anyway, I called my dad. I said, Dad, I have a problem with this. I'm out here teaching the gospel, and I don't believe three of these seven things.
Mm.
In other words, I do believe three of the seven things. He just told me I'm going to, I don't remember what his words were. I think he called us all idiots.
Mm.
My dad said, well, that's funny, Rich, because I just came from Spencer Kimball's office where I told him this is an abomination.
Ooh.
And then I gave him the information on evolution. The first presidency has made no decision on progression between kingdoms. The first presidency, these are letters that say the first presidency has made no decision. We don't know. And Brigham Young, this is what made me think about it, is when you talked about two people, Brigham Young and Orson Pratt on can we progress between kingdoms after this life?
Mm-hmm.
They went at each other all over the place. But here's Elder McConkie, who, by the way, was one of my dad's closest friends.
Which is also amazing.
Which is
An
amazing,
example,
yeah. He
an
wasn't
example
close.
that we need today to be able to
Yeah, he
have.
wasn't close friends with a few others. Let me just be on in fairness. But he was very close with Bruce. Bruce McConkie and Duff Hanks were buddies, and spent 17 years in the first quorum of the first council of the first presidency of the first council of the 70.
Mm-hmm.
But my dad used to always quote this quote by Charles Penrose, and I wrote it down in case this came up. I don't know where it is. Oh, dogmatic assertions do not take the place of revelation.
Jeez, that's powerful.
And that's so he would sit down and say, and just in this case, Elder McConkie, and again, no shots at anyone. Elder McConkie believes strongly, and so when he believes strongly for himself, he decided that he believes strongly for everyone else.
Yeah,
and he can do that for some things, but Doctrine and Covenants 28 is really clear: one man, the prophet. So because my dad was a believer, and because he believed that, he went down to the prophet and said, "Is this right?" And the answer was no.
Yeah.
So you don't see that talk. It's circulated under the ground a bit, but my point is this: way back to the first question, he went. He didn't choose. He wasn't trying to pick a fight, but he just could not stomach some things that he thought were ludicrous. I remember one part in his journal. He's going after another very famous general authority who had decided that, as they're working on this new YSA program, that the young people can meet on Monday nights, but then after their 1 hour meeting of family home evening, they are to immediately go back and study. And in my dad's journal, he writes to this individual, Boyd, do you think it's do you think it's possible that any rule that is broken 100% of the time might ought to be looked at? Maybe
Hmm.
these kids are gonna meet in the family evening, and then they're gonna stay,
Yeah.
and that's a good thing.
Yeah. And we want them
Uh,
to. Yep.
yeah, but that seems silly, right? It seems like a silly little thing, except for there's hundreds of those, right? There are hundreds of things, and that ought to not. Back to the original quote I gave a minute ago was the things that matter most should not be at the mercy of the things that matter least, and the things that matter most to him were what the scriptures said, which is serving our fellow man. I want to go back to something you said a minute ago. Do we have time? Or
Yeah, of course.
yeah. You had mentioned.
I'm at the mercy of your time. So if we
Oh,
go
I
a
got all
little bit
day.
long, that's great.
You had mentioned something that I struggle with, and that is people leaving. I don't remember the words you used, but people leaving the church. What I often hear is that I'm going to leave the church because I don't get anything out of it. And Dad's point of view was that if we would just put things into it, you can leave because you don't like what you see, or you can stay and try to improve the church. The church is not the gospel, despite what some people like to say. He absolutely drew a line. To him, there was a fine. Yeah, there's some overlap, but just there was generally a fine line between priesthood, gospel, church. He would say, look, the church is imperfect. It's full of imperfect men. And I know because I'm one of them.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of my favorite quotes. So, yeah, we find a few warts on the church. We allow for repentance of individuals. Can we not allow for repentance of church? Can we not say, and can we not say, well, how can I help here? What can I do to improve? And that's really where he spent a lot of his time when he was working on the institutional church. And the way he did that was through tactical execution of things. So let me give you a great example. He spent all these years trying to trying to convince those in senior leadership above him, which weren't many out of a church of millions, mm-hmm. that we should have institutional humanitarian work. And then he gets called to Asia as the area president of Southeast Asia, we'd call today. And he's living in Hong Kong, and he sees these refugee camps. And so, yeah, we can talk about service all day long till you're blue in the face. So he went and opened up Mormon non-proselyting, really important after the comma, Mormon, non-proselyting refugee work. And he went to all of his missions. He had 18 missions, and he grabbed 2 sisters from here and 2 sisters from here and 2 sisters from here. He brought them all together, put them in the refugee camps. Then he went back to get some more money because everything requires money. And he's standing in front of his colleagues, and one of them says, how many baptisms is this going to cost us?
Oh, geez.
And my dad said, all of them. And we're going to do it because Jesus told us to do it and because we have some extra resources. And so my point was, you can talk about service. He would talk about service, but he'd come home from a stake conference exhausted on a Sunday night, and it'd be snowing like crazy outside. And he'd grab me, and we'd go out in our parka, in his old brown coat, and we'd start shoveling our walks. And we get to the end, and I'm turning around. He said, hey, let's go do our neighbors. And we would shovel the whole stinking street. And this man was the real deal. And I think this is going to be a little bit of me. I think I hear a lot of, I don't get anything out of the Mormon. I don't get the ROI out of the Mormon church. It's almost like you want to be entertained or something. It's like, how about you turn around and go and see what you can do to improve our sacrament meeting? I sound a little bit of a soapbox here, but it's actually how he talked all the time.
Well, I think I think that it's an important part of it. In the years, so I used to live in Salt Lake, and the political landscape of my particular ward was much different from where I live now out in Taylorsville. It was very for the sake of using terms, it was fairly liberal where I lived, and now it's very conservative. It could not be more different. And and some of those things that come along with being more liberal and come along with being conservative have been very apparent in the 2 different congregations that I've worshiped with. And I have had to consciously change in the way, not in what I believe doctrinally, but in the way that I engage with those that I worship, because I disagree very strongly with some of the people that I worship with now, and it becomes almost like there's winks and nods of like we all know how we're going to vote in November, and I just find that so exhausting. It's like, nope, I don't. In fact, I feel so very different from you, and sometimes it just feels very kind of alone, and I think that sometimes can be exhausting. But I think you're right. I think if we aren't getting what we want from our time with those with that we're worshiping with, so often I think we look at, oh well, that the church needs to do better for me, and I think the alternate is true. I think we need to do better for the church, because when I have spoken out, gone and done something, I have found that I'm not as alone as I've thought, but that other people have either thought or felt the same things, but maybe at some time didn't have the courage to be able to say something or to do something about it, and
And
have.
again, if you can't change something, he couldn't change the situation with the blacks.
Sure.
Uh, I don't know. That's a whole 2 hours, but he couldn't change it, and so he tried his best to live within the circumstances that he had. He wouldn't speak against the prophet but he went down to David O. McKay's office time and time. This is all in other books,
Sure.
all documented. Went down time and time again to say, look, this is not right. Near the end of his life, he said, I spent 40 years trying to defend a church that taught something I didn't believe. Now, how could he do that? Well, Hugh B. Brown did it one way,
Hmm.
and it was exciting. That's all documented also elsewhere. But, the way my dad accomplished that or tried it is when he gets off his mission and he's been with a black family named the Hopes, and no hotel in Salt Lake City would take them.
Jeez.
And so guess what? He just had him stay at his house.
Hmm.
Again, I'm not necessarily trying to say hooray, hooray for dad, but he just, if there was something that needed to be fixed, he didn't point a finger and say, stupid church. He said, how can I make this better? Well, I'm going to have him stay at my house. I'm going to have him eat with my family. And then I'm going to go back and talk to, he had a certain, a different, approach to get into. I mean, he had the ability to get into the prophet, and I'm going to keep asking him. And David O. McKay would say to him, Duff, I've tried and tried, I've prayed and prayed, and I don't have an answer yet. And then so he would do his best to try and explain it away as best he could. My point isn't necessarily it's that we can talk about things and we can talk about strategies and we can talk about whether or not we believe in dogma. First of all, he didn't push dogma.
Hmm.
Like I said, he knew the scriptures in and out. You go look at all of his talks. They're about mercy, Jesus, service. Very rarely gets off into subjects that are, Mormon church right, Mormon church. It's just not the way he was. He preferred to lift and push. I'll give you another great example that just came to my mind.
Hmm.
I went on my mission, and a lot of companions, and this is a cultural thing, I think, would say, basically, we're right and you're wrong.
Yeah.
Right? I
Yep.
mean, all missionaries have to decide how they're going to pitch the concept of the restoration.
Sure. True
I
church.
will tell you, I
One
have a
true.
testimony of the restoration, no question. It was here, it went away, it came back, no question. How do you present that? Well,
Hmm.
there's a lot of people where I live. It's Skyline versus Olympus, right? It's Olympus is right, Skyline's horrible.
Hmm. I
Most
mean,
of that comes from
that's
football.
accurate, but that's for another day. Sure.
Or okay, I went to East Highland, East West. How about BYU, Utah? We could
Yeah.
spend hours on
Oh,
that.
that's a
And
whole.
somehow that gets caught up in our in our minds that that's the right way to present restoration, and it's absolutely not. He believes what Ether 12, 11, I think it's 12, 12 and 11 maybe, in the Lord Jesus Christ is found the more excellent way.
Hmm.
And that's how, I know that's not like a simple difference, but it's huge because one way we're telling people you don't have the right heavenly credentials to get to heaven.
Hmm.
The other way we're saying, hey, our sign says visitors welcome,
Hmm.
take what you've got, come with us.
Yeah.
Now, that was a radical thought in the 1950s and 60s. I got to tell you, I mean, I was a young kid, but in the 60s when I was born, but even when I was a missionary in 78, 79, It's basically we're right and you're wrong, and as opposed to you're right and guess what? There's more.
Hmm.
And yeah, some things he got a little off on the whole baptism of children, but this concept of we are the Mormons and 17 million and go team go, it just didn't sit well with him. He didn't think we were trying to become the biggest and best and all this kind of stuff. He just thought we should follow, the Lord Jesus Christ and what he taught. And uh, what he taught was the more excellent way.
Yeah, that resonates with me. That very famous, and I say now very famous, and I'm going to struggle to even paraphrase it, but President Hinckley, who said, "Bring us the people,
Yeah,
and we'll make them better." Right?
yeah,
There is good found in everything, and
yeah.
we want to make it better. That more excellent way. I want to take a break. When we come back, we're going to jump around so much in the third block. I want to talk. You label Duff a Renaissance man, and I want to get into maybe some things lesser known about him, and then also there is a passionate feeling that I have about leadership within the church. I would love to get your feedback about that. We'll come back and do that in the third block of the Cultural Hall. BestDJinUtah.com is the website. That is where you go if you would like me to come and DJ your event. Now, will I do a family reunion where you all wear the same t-shirts? You bet I will. Will I travel to wherever you're at? Uh-huh. Am I reasonable as far as what I cost? Yes. Yes. Do I bring a good time? Yeah, all the things. Listen, Best DJ in Utah, it's my company. It's a thing I do that allows me to be able to have the time to do the Cultural Hall. So if someone's getting married, you think, man, they need a great DJ. You're throwing a party, whether it's a 50th or 60th or 40th or 20th or whatever the party is. I've done them all and would love to be able to do that. An anniversary party, certainly done those. I did a baptism in 2023. Yeah, we did a big dance party at a baptism. Spoiler, not a Mormon baptism, but it was fun nonetheless. BestDJinUtah.com is a website. I will get back to you within 24 hours with a quote. Come on now. BestDJinUtah.com. Here in the third block of the Cultural Hall, remember, you can always put your money where your ears are and become a Patreon saint of the Cultural Hall. Go to patreon.com/the Cultural Hall. It's a support thing, so think about it. You have listened to episode upon episode upon episode of the Cultural Hall, and, it costs money to do these things. Time certainly as well. For as little as $5 a month, you get to be a part of the secret but not sacred Facebook group where all the Patreon saints are hanging out, and we would love it if you would consider doing so. Make it a New Year's resolution. Make it a Christmas gift to the Cultural Hall. Whatever the thing is, whatever drives you to do that. It's patreon.com/the Cultural Hall. So I want to jump around a little bit and let's start here. You talked about how your dad helped out with the emeritus status. The idea of serving for your entire life, there's something very noble about it. And there also, to me, I feel like it should be a choice that for the apostles, and maybe this is the ultimate heresy, even the prophet, and I understand how that would be a difficult thing when we talk about the prophet himself, but health struggles that we see on public display with some of these gentlemen, I don't know how you feel, so I'm curious. Don't you feel like we should give at least the option of tapping out? It's been great serving the church. What an amazing experience. I would like to be with my family for the rest of my life and not do some of those things.
Oof. I'd rather not get excommunicated. Well, we all have our own personal opinions. I would say this: read the book. I mean, I put in, it's not a lot; it's just a couple of quotes, I think. But Dad felt very clearly that we shouldn't trot out a bunch of old men who don't know where they are. I'm not being specific. I'm just sort of being generic.
Sure.
So think about it again. He's 31 years old. He gets called. Let me just really quick, let me go back to that because I don't think people really understand. If I was to sit you down with a chalkboard and say, what do you do every Friday at 4? I would bet 9 out of 10 people would say, I'm looking forward to going home at 5 and having a weekend.
Mm-hmm.
So weekends. Okay. How about retirement? The word retirement. Someday I'm going to be 65 and I'm going to sit around and drink orange soda and watch football games, TV.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
All that's gone for these guys back in the 50s, 60s, and for the apostles still, for these brethren.
Yeah.
I mean, I put my dad on a plane I would go out with my mom or my sister, whoever was driving. We take them out a Friday, get on a plane, fly somewhere in the world, or drive. Usually drive more back then, but now we're so big. Fly somewhere in the world for either the weekend or sometimes for 3 weeks if he's going to be gone. Comes home on the weekend, Western Airlines. Go pick him up. My mom would hang his suit outside to get all the cigarette smoke off of the suit because everybody smoked on planes back then.
Mm-hmm.
And do it all again. Then Monday gets Monday off. And then the rest of the week, he's working, 12, 16 hours a day. And he's talking to people with problems for much of that. And then it's Friday again. And the weekend is to get on a plane and go to Poughkeepsie or Orlando.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you're 65, you're out. So when you're 65, you're not out. You're still in. You're in until you're dead. That's when you retire. So I only bring that up because I sometimes think people forget that because they don't live that life. They don't know what it's like.
Right.
So, gosh, I forgot what was the original question. So I believe personally, and he believed that why not let him be emeritus? So he and others made that point, and he was one of the first 3 or 4. He didn't turn. They left him right to the end of 70. It was like 70 and 11 months, I think, or 12 months, because they didn't want to lose him. And then, what do I think about today? I think it would be great to put in if someone is ailing and not compos mentis,
mm-hmm.
which has happened for previous prophets. I think that
apostles,
I think we should let them out. Now, I don't know about the prophet. I don't know how that would work, and no one's asked, and
Sure.
It's none of my business. But let's say in the first presidency, I know President Hinckley was basically running the church for many years before he became the prophet. Sure. He was like a third counselor, or I can't remember now, but.
It does seem to me that for better and for worse, some of the things that we get when we have these people that are called in their 20s, President Monson, 30s, as they serve and do some of those things, that there is something that is missing with that when we have people just because of the life expectancy 90, 100 years old.
Well, we could play high school debate here, and I could take the other side and say,
Please.
You know what, in a 100-year-old prophet in Russell Nelson, wow.
Yes.
And he is spry and he has taken care of himself. And I firmly believe that the Lord is inspiring through him. And I'm not just saying that. Having said all that, I know President Benson was out of it for years. And I believe President Kimball for years.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I think the Lord will direct his church, but I think sometimes we get dogmatic in certain things, or maybe they're cultural things that just say, because surely hopefully the older a person is, the wiser he is, and he and she. And I would argue that that the older general authorities have a set of wisdom and maybe inspiration and maybe, just general experience in life and listening to the Spirit and so forth. But on the other hand, if they're non-compos mentis, right, if they're not able to talk and so forth, why wouldn't we?
And to me, I just think it's I like the idea. We see this in political leadership as well, where so much of the church is younger folk. I think that is to be representative as well. And so I look for some of those things. That's neither here nor there, nor not adjacent to what your pops both did and thought, but a conversation I like to have with anyone who will engage, because for some people it makes them very uncomfortable, and they'll say things like, if the Lord doesn't want them alive, he'll take them. And I just think, okay, well, that maybe is a little aggressive on the other side of that whole thing. Another thing I want to ask you about your pops, Renaissance man. When I think of a Renaissance man, I think of a man of many talents, things that they couldn't do, or that there wasn't anything that he couldn't do. I'd be curious about how he was personally, crafty, athletic. What was he like in that aspect?
I thank you for this question, because in all these podcasts, I spend all the time and I don't actually get to talk about Dad. I'm talking about Marion D. Hanks. Let me just start with this. He gets put on. He makes the University of Utah basketball team.
Wow. Okay.
Try to imagine a player playing for BYU or Utah right now, right? And he is called in the newspapers the most promising player that Vadel Peterson had in years. Now, Vadel Peterson was, like today's Witt or Lavelle Edwards or, whatever, but
Mhm.
it's basketball.
Sure.
He quits to go play on his ward team with his brother Bruce and his buddies, or no, I guess Bruce was not, but with his buddies, and they win the biggest basketball tournament in the world at the time, which was the LDS All Church Basketball Tournament. Can you imagine that happening today?
Yeah. No, I cannot.
um, so
Well,
he won the biggest basketball, all church basketball. He won the Utah State handball championship, I think in his 20s or 30s. He won this new sport came along called racquetball, and so he picked that up and he won the Utah State racquetball championship. I think 30s or 40s. I don't have the dates. Then this new sport came along called, it wasn't new, it was an old sport, but it was new to Utah, called squash.
mhm.
Much more difficult game than racquetball. He won the Utah State squash championship in, I
Jeez.
think, his 50s. There was not a ball or a bat or a racket or a football. There was no, I mean, he could play any sport. And as the starry-eyed son that I try not to be in the book, I will be here. He was out of this world amazing.
Hmm.
I mean, he didn't play foosball, but other than that, pool, ping pong, tennis, and he was a competitor and he would play hard. And I beat him when I was 6. I was a good tennis player. When I was 16, I beat him in the first game, and he came to the net and he said, "You sure the net's the right height? Your shoes look untied, Rich.
Yeah.
Do you want me to play right-handed this next game?" I mean, he was just mentally, just after it. And it's so funny. But let me tell you my favorite story. He gets invited to speak in the University of Texas, held a religious leaders conference. So I guess there's all the religions, and they're all there.
Mhm.
He speaks on the first day and the third day, so he's got this extra day. And everywhere he went in those days, the early days when he was in his 30s and 40s, people would set up people to play him in athletics.
Really?
Yeah. So here he is. He's at the University of Texas. This is all documented. It's all in the book, by the way. I may get a few things wrong, but these all crack me up. They bring in their best players and he just whips them all. So then they bring, and he's 15 years older than these are all college kids, right?
Right.
The height of their, so then they go get a guy, they get the very best player on the campus. And he said, "Yeah, I'll meet you the next day." And he just takes this guy out. And in the program that I have, it says, the guy, this is now writing after the conference, Elder Marion D. Hanks from the Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints gave the I can't remember, I'm going to paraphrase, the most spectacular talk at the conference on youth and so forth. So on. And then it says, "And who doesn't love a minister you can sweat with?" Something like that.
That's awesome.
He was on, for example, I don't know if when you were a kid, they still had him. When I was a kid, we had the President's Council of Physical Fitness and Sports, and we had to do pull-ups and stuff. He was
Sure.
on that for 5 U.S. presidents.
Jeez.
He was going to be the president. Now, this is starry-eyed son completely, but this is how I knew him, I mean, I knew him at our cabin, cutting wood, chopping wood, putting on our waders and moving rocks around in the stream. He was just, for lack of he was a man's man. And yet he was in a suit and tie up on a dais all the time. He and when I say Renaissance man, he loved poetry. Get this, when he's newly married, no, it's before he got married. He's working at the place called the Rainbow Rendezvous downtown,
Okay.
and he's a waiter until 11 o'clock, and the college age crowd comes in, and then he turns into a bouncer as they all get drunk, basically. And so he's keeping the peace, blah, blah, blah. And then he walks home from Main Street and 4th South. And he walks home back to Capitol Hill where he lives. And he's memorizing 50 lines of Shakespeare every night for his Shakespeare class the next morning at the University of Utah.
Wow.
So when I say Renaissance man, it was like choose a subject, poetry, author, public speaker, kick you in basketball.
Mm-hmm.
Take you out at your knees and squash. I was a good squash player too when I was younger, and now I couldn't get close to getting a game off of him. And he was 60. He was my age now. Is that right? Yeah, he's like my age now or a little bit younger. So thank you for asking that question. And I could go, on and on just sort of like choose a subject, the military and whatever.
Yeah.
But he was so different. And the other way he was very different is Most of the leaders of our church are quite insular. I don't take that as a shot. It's mostly because they don't have any time,
Hmm.
probably, but they're sort of internal focused. He wasn't. He was on the boards of the YMCA and the Community Chest and Salvation Army. I mean, a Mormon leader on the board of directors of the Salt Lake Salvation Army. One time he So at one time he was the chairman of the Desert Gym, which is the church ran these gyms that are right where the conference center is today.
Yep.
And so he became the chairman of the Desert Gym. He's the general authority assigned to that. And he would get me on a Saturday morning and say, "Come on, we're going to go play squash." And we'd go to the YMCA and play squash because he wanted to know other people to see that Mormons were not insular. Then he went in to the prophet and said, "I'd like $25,000 to give to the YMCA, please." And they'd say, wait, aren't they our competitor?
Yeah.
And he'd say, "Yeah, but they're good people and they have a bad plant. Their courts are failing. They need to paint their courts. And I think it'd be a good gesture for us to give them $25,000."
Yes.
All while he's the chairman of the Desert Gym. So thank you for asking that question. I'm sorry I got a little starry-eyed for just a minute.
No, I think it's when you have an incredible person like that in your life, I think that it's important to share the stories that you have, the perspective that you have. So many people will know various church leaders from what they allowed to be seen, and you have an inside look at your dad at Duff, which I think is just absolutely awesome. You are Richard D. Hanks. Are you Richard Duff Hanks?
Yes, and my son is Daniel Duff Hanks, and his son is James Duff Hanks. And there's a whole story there, which I'll just give you in 1 minute, if I can.
Please.
18-year-old young lady. She's living in Glasgow. It's the 1860s. She's goes to church with the Mormons. Comes home. Her parents say, "Absolutely not. You're not going to be around these heretics." She puts a hymn book in her pocket, hangs her jacket up. Her dad hits it. It falls to the floor and says, What's going on here? I told you not to be there." Long story short, she joins the church. She gets disowned. She comes to Utah with her new husband. Her husband dies. She's now left with 7, 8 kids. Her best friend is married to Archibald Frame, who lived right by you.
Mm-hmm.
And so Janet, her sweet best friend, said, "Why don't you come live with us?" And there's a whole thing here. And Janet one day puts a little piece of paper in Archibald Frame's hand, and it says, "Look, we've taken care of this family. Why don't you just marry her?"
Mm.
So polygamy, the two of them had 16 children. They had a 17th. That's my grandma. So that lady's name was Helen Duff Dick. So in honor of her, Marion Duff Hanks, Richard Duff Hanks, Daniel Duff Hanks, James Duff Hanks, and I have other nephews who are also named Duff. So we go up to her little gravestone, headstone in the Salt Lake Cemetery, and we pay her homage because without her, I'm not here either as a person or as an LDS member.
Yeah, that's incredible. The name of the book, if people want to check it out, and they'll be able to get a link to it in the show notes of this, "To Be a Friend of Christ, The Life of Marion D. Hanks." Richard, there are 3 questions that we ask everyone who steps into the Cultural Hall, and I will ask those of you now. The first question is do you have a calling right now? And if so, what is it?
I'm blessed. I get to teach gospel doctrine.
Okay.
And I have a terrific ward and great people, and I do my best. I haven't thrown any tomatoes yet. I've been doing it a couple of years.
Now I just want to give someone in your ward a tomato just so you can say, "Well, I had 1 tomato."
You know, it's funny. If anybody watches this the next time I teach, that'd be fun.
I would love that. Intentionally miss, but to throw a tomato. We don't have nearly enough tomatoes thrown. The second question is, if you could pick a calling for yourself, either one that exists or make one up, what would you pick?
Oh, I've never been asked that ever. Probably gospel doctrine.
And
I love it. If it helps me study better, it gets me prepared. If I could be young again, I'd be a mission president again. I never wanted to be a bishop or a stake president. I never had those in my goals, but I did. When I got home from my mission, I was like, "Boy, I'd love to be a mission president." And you can't run for it, I guess. Well, maybe I didn't, but what a joy and blessing and being a bishop is the hardest thing you'll ever do in your life, probably. But teaching gospel doctrine, yeah. I love the gospel. I love the scriptures, and I like learning myself. So yeah, probably that.
A quick follow-up on that. Is there a particular year, we do Book of Mormon 1 year, Doctrine and Covenants and such. Is there a particular year of gospel doctrine that you love the most?
Yeah, I mean, I think the old standby would be the Book of Mormon just because it's so awesome. But I really like Paul's letters.
Cool.
I'm not a huge fan of the Old Testament, but that's just because I'm not very smart. But
that resonates with me. When people will tell me that the Old Testament is their favorite, I go, we have nothing in common.
Bless you. I have a really smart sisters, and some of them like the Old Testament and the poetic parts of it. And I don't think I'm smart enough. I read it and I love it. And there's great stuff in it.
The last question we ask everyone, we ask you to interpret it however you would like. But the question is what is your favorite part of your faith?
Mercy.
I think that speaks certainly to the legacy of your dad. And I would, though, we don't know each other very well, met just before we started recording this. I'm sure that yours is a life that is exemplary as far as mercy. I know you don't like the attention turned towards you, but I think that if nothing else, that's definitely something that those that would study the life of your pops, just those that are members of the church, we could use a little bit more mercy for ourselves and for others. Richard Hanks, name of the book, To Be a Friend of Christ, The Life of Marion D. Hanks. It, of course, from Signature Books, and you can find a link to purchase it in the show notes, and do so. It is my intention to be able to read this book, and I look forward to it. Richard, thank you for your time. I hope that this episode has nourished and strengthened your body, that if you're not healthy enough to listen this week, that you'll be healthy enough to listen next week, and that when the time comes, you'll be able to travel home in safety. In the meantime, Chris at Alpine Lakes Travel, Rick McGee, Debbie Wanless, Chocolate Cake Bites Podcast, and the Tiger with a U will be saving a seat for you on the back row of the Cultural Hall.
Save me a seat, it's sure to be neat on the back row. We really gotta go on the Cultural Hall show.